The ruler of the kingdom of Aden was a cruel tyrant. He killed everyone from adults to babies. Because of this ruler, the capital lived in blood and fear for a long time. Because of this, it was called the City of Silence. At that time, the goal was for everyone to survive. There was a Count Luxon who had 2 daughters whom he loved very much. The older daughter's name was Ljubljana. The younger was Kalina. At 15, Ljubljana, watching her beautiful sister, decided to give her an appropriate gift. She believed that in such difficult times, gaining power should not depend on the order in which children were born. Ljubljana decided that Cullen should be the next countess. While she was so worried about the future, their parents were summoned to the capital and killed. Her decision to make Kalina a countess was not known and will never be known. The count's death was caused by a crack in a pearl that had been given to the king. The funeral lasted 3 days. Their father paid for his desire to protect the family. Giving up power, these plans failed. This will never be forgiven. Peace was no longer in sight, but determination filled. The day Kalina turned 18, Ljubljana gave her a gift. She gave her the Luxon family signet ring. Ljubljana gave her title to her sister. Her uncle didn't understand what she was doing because the ceremony was held on her 18th birthday. But Ljubljana thought it was not yet time for him to know. The girl often thought about it after the loss of her parents and decided that she wanted to live as a nun, escaping from the world in this way. One night, Cullen woke her sister up saying she knew why she was going to the Luthal convent. All their lives there, they can live and have fun because there is not much discipline to follow. And also their family had made many donations there. Ljubljana told her sister to make the donations or she would be harassed. She didn't promise to write first, but if she did, let her sister be sure to write back to her. Ljubljana also told her sister not to even think about revenge. They should live as they lived and take care of each other. Ljubljana went to the convent. Life was calm and measured. She answered her sister's letters daily. The kingdom's affairs were deteriorating. The tyrant ruler thought he would never grow old. It had been 4 years since Ljubljana had been in the convent. Kalina came to see her. She announced that she was finally ready to destroy the bastard. And now she needed Ljubljana's help to do it. She wanted to join her in destroying this tyrant. Ljubljana left her sister not only the title, but also the care of the family. She felt it would protect Kalina and keep their family's title safe. Just in case, while at the convent, Ljubljana practiced her training. In the backyard, Cullen was finally able to find a way to take down the enemy. She appeared fully prepared in front of her sister. Only she needed Ljubljana's help. Ljubljana knelt before Kalina and began to make her vows. Ljubljana changed her name to Crystal. She promised to serve with loyalty and respect. Kalina gave her new last name to her sister's 2 names, emphasizing that her names were now her own. Kalina's sister's name was now Ljubljana Crystal von Ashlian. Kalina ordered her to raise her sword and follow her. Ljubljana obeyed the order and began to swear an oath to the Lord. She asked for help and protection for Kalina. Ljubljana vowed if God would help her, she would give up her firstborn. The Cullen army was very strong. It was made up of people who had been persecuted by the tyrant, as well as monks from the monastery. At first, the army did not go to the center, but moved north and east. In the east, Count de Mincent hung a white flag agreeing to surrender. As proof, he sacrificed his best swordsman, his son, Dominant Lou Dante. Thanks to the Count's surrender, the east was obtained without bloodshed. Next, the army traveled to the west of the kingdom. A battle took place there. Ljubljana killed all the enemies, but only one she failed to kill, Feldharg Kadrik, the main defender of the west. When Ljubljana was aiming at Feldharg Kadrika, he spotted her and caught her. Her arrow caused him to lose an eye. Feldharg didn't realize why, so he pierced Ljubljana's shoulder with his sword. When each had received a blow, Ljubljana and Feldharg headed for the negotiating table. There was no surrender in the West's plans. Suddenly, an angry Cullen burst into the negotiating room. She was worried about her sister. Suddenly, Feldharg saw Kalina and agreed to the surrender. Ljubljana thought he would make a good groom. Even though he's an enemy, he has a powerful willpower. Ljubljana made a vow that she would still need to marry. But first she has to make Kalina empress, and then she can think about who to marry. With the south, west, and east in hand, Cullen's army headed for the center. The capital was exhausted by the tyrant ruler and did not resist the arrival of the troops. The people welcomed the army with all their hearts. Without much effort, 7 gates were passed through. when the army was in the very center of the capital and was ready to fight the enemy. The army met an unexpected guest. A delegation from the king had arrived and delivered a message. The king wanted Cullen to become his concubine and bear an heir. Only then would he forgive her. Ljubljana would not tolerate such disrespect and immediately punished the prankster with her sword. That night, the decisive battle took place. The king's army was so weak that it lasted only one night. All the men of the battlefield fled, and now it was the turn of the greatest enemy of all. The king begged for mercy, offered to give up everything, money, land, just to stay alive. But Cullen would never spare him. The king fell by her sword. She had finally avenged her parents' deaths. The next day, Kulena was announced as the new ruler of the kingdom. It was already over, so Ljubljana had to think about fulfilling her oath. Kulena asked for her sister's help. She wanted to turn the kingdom into an empire, and she wanted Ljubljana to catch the dragon. All the neighboring kingdoms were occupied. Some had to be destroyed. Others surrendered with a promise to serve faithfully. 4 of the best warriors headed north. They were coming for the dragon. Everything had to be done carefully, and so as not to damage the dragon's skin. The battle was particularly brutal, but the brave warriors' efforts were not in vain, and so the battle comes to an end. Lu Dante cut out the eyes and heart of the dragon. Now Kulena sat on a throne made of dragon skin, wearing a crown with a dragon's heart. Kulena is the first empress. Her 3 loyal warriors, protectors, were always by her side. In gratitude, she gave them the titles of dukes and gifted them lands. Dominant of the Black Tulips received the lands of the west. Feldharg of the Rose of the Iron Cross was given the lands of the south. Ljubljana, or as she is now called Ashley of the Silver Line, was given the worst lands of the north. The beasts that lived there were infected, and the local population was nothing but prisoners. Cullen trusted her sister, and wished she was the one to protect her empire. Ljubljana went there and began to restore order. She banished monsters, imposed taxes, began training soldiers, and built a great wall to prevent damage. When things started to get better in the north, a letter came from the capital. And now Ljubljana is 29. She receives orders to come to the capital. When she arrives, Ljubljana sees how much things have changed. Everything has been very much transformed, and society has also flourished. About Ljubljana on arrival began to go different rumors that led her to bewilderment. They said she had 3 eyes and was terribly muscular, and could wring her neck with one hand. Cullen scoffed at the situation, and spoke of snapping the necks of those who had wronged her. Ljubljana thought it was all her doing, but as it turns out, people create their own stories. Cullen said that if Ljubljana stayed in the capital for a while, it would all be resolved. There were still a lot of issues that Kulena needed help with. Ljubljana also needs to start looking for a husband to fulfill her vows. 1 child to give to God, and the other to inherit the title of Duke and be loyal to the empire. Ljubljana needs a man who can easily help her have 2 children. She needs a strong man. For Ljubljana was allocated a mansion near the imperial palace. There was also a woman named Maid of Honor. She was a domestic helper. Many invitations arrived, which Ljubljana immediately wanted to decline. But still, one had to be accepted. This was to show the friendship between the 3 dukes to strengthen the empress's authority. The Maid of Honor picked up invitations to those parties where there would be people of social circles. Ljubljana was already regretting having agreed. But the Maid of Honor wished that she would get rid of those thoughts. She reminded Ljubljana of her grandmother, so she decided not to object. The banquet Ljubljana went to was given by the Marquis. Guys and girls, unmarried, were gathered there. They demonstrated their knowledge and talked about different topics. In fact, it was a place where everyone could start dating without having to get married. The Maid of Honor said that Ljubljana should choose a good and unambitious husband, just like grandmother. Ljubljana was transported back to her childhood. Her grandmother called her Ljubi. She said a handsome and intelligent husband would choose a girl from a powerful family in the capital. Grandmother urged her to remember her words. A husband who would do no harm in any way. After all, Ljubljana is the future of Luxon County, and no one should undermine the authority. Ljubljana was imbued with memories and decided that this matter must be finished. A lot of good guys had died during the Civil War, but one should not give up hope. All around looked at Ljubljana with horror, passed each other different rumors. They called the girl a bloody duchess. A glass burst in her hands. She was the only reason everyone was safe, and they were only discussing. A servant ran up to her offering help, but Ljubljana refused. The amount of attention increased. Ljubljana didn't realize what the looks were. They were the looks she hated the most. Ljubljana saw the wife of the Marquis of Libador and made her way towards her. She thanked her for the invitation and said goodbye. Her opponent said that she would certainly welcome Ljubljana's presence at the next banquet. Ljubljana decided to take a walk, so as not to raise too many questions from the maid of honor. She thought that God really existed if they had it so easy. They need to fulfill their promise soon, but marriage isn't that easy, and there was no chance to walk away from it. Suddenly, Ljubljana saw two strangers. They interested her. The girl who stood there was very beautiful, in expensive jewelry and outfits. You'd think she was a member of some rich family. The guy who was there was dressed in simple clothes. You couldn't say he was from some noble family, but he was incredibly handsome and very interesting. Ljubljana thought of this man as an angel. He was the most beautiful, but also with the worst mood. Ljubljana continued to watch the picture as the beautiful girl asked not to avoid her. The guy's name was Louimond. He snatched his hand out of the beautiful lady's hands. Ljubljana thought his manners were unknown to him. Louimond was looking around, looking for someone. And that beautiful girl was saying that he would belong to her. She would get him. Louimond kept looking, and I think he was looking for Ljubljana. He was perfect, but he had a terrible temper. And then she remembered her grandmother and her instructions about a good husband. The next time Ljubljana met this handsome man was at the palace. He was different there than in the garden. He was polite and had a lot of girls around him. Feldhard came up to Ljubljana and brought wine. He saw Louimond and was completely perplexed. Ljubljana joked that even with one eye he noticed his beauty. Kadrik recalled that he had lost an eye to Ljubljana. She was still ashamed of it in front of him, especially since he was a potential candidate for the Cullen's husband. Ljubljana asked about Louimond. Feldhard said he was the grandson of Earl Graham. So Louimond is from a family that was close to the tyrant. During the midnight battle, the whole family surrendered and submitted to Cullen, and all those who submitted were pardoned due to the Empress's kindness. Kadrik felt that these people were ingratiating themselves for survival. Then Earl Graham bought handsome men for Kalina and sent many gifts. Kalina felt there was no need to keep an eye on this Earl. She probably had some sort of plan. Ljubljana thought back to all of the family members she had seen, and they were different. Their hair was the color of wheat, and their eyes were brown, and their bodies flabby. Louimond had silver hair and black eyes and a good body. It was as if he was the illegitimate son of a tyrant. Louimond Fen Lucas Amel von Graham. Such a name was the mark of the royal family. Ljubljana couldn't believe it. He was the last blood relative, or rather the last member of the royal family that was destroyed. Louimond was the only descendant of the tyrant. Ljubljana didn't understand how he had survived, since all his relatives, his newborn children, had been destroyed. And how come he is now at a banquet organized by the imperial palace? Louimond's identity was discovered not long ago, and there's also information that he's from the House of Scientists. People locked themselves into this house and took an oath to study for the rest of their lives. Now Ljubljana understood how he had survived. The House of Scholars was untouchable and respected by all. It was beyond the fringes of politics. The people of the House of Scholars were locked up, and so Ljubljana did not understand why Louimond was here. Feldhard had sent reports to the north more than once. As it turned out, Ljubljana had not read everything and was not aware that the House of Scholars had been closed, so that the smart people would now work for the government. When all the people started to recover their documents, that's when the tyrant's illegitimate son was discovered. By order of the Empress, he was not killed. There are still some small pawns trying to follow the tyrant's ideas. Kalina wants to bring them out into the open and take them all out together. Louimond looked at Ljubljana for a long time, and his look was unusual, pitying. The girl did not understand what made him look at her with a look of despair. A servant came to tell her that the Empress had arrived. Feldhard and Ljubljana went to see her. The whole situation with Louimond would be handled by someone, so there was no need to worry. The Empress's job doesn't involve any flashy tricks or beauty, and Ljubljana needs to get back north with her found husband as soon as possible. Stepping out into the garden, she met the couple that had been following her again. The girl was again saying that Louimond would be her husband. Ljubljana had already realized that going out for some fresh air was not worth it. But what happened stopped her. The blue-haired girl was telling Luman to cooperate with her family. She said that talk of marriage was already going on between the families, so Luman should give in. Ljubljana came out from behind the bushes and said that they should stop these actions because they were on the grounds of the emperor's garden. Ljubljana thought she should help Luimund. He was in an extremely bad situation for him. That girl was Lisana from the Marquis of Odile, and she informed Ljubljana that she was spending time with her lover. So politely, Ljubljana was asked to stay out of the way. She didn't expect anything else from a family that was a strong supporter of the royal family of Anos. In the Old Kingdom, the Marquis of Odile had its own history, but after the overthrow of the tyrant, their rank was lowered, and they were removed from the central positions. The Marquis's power was so strong that the tyrant couldn't kill him. They had to leave the capital. Ljubljana thought Lisana would hate the kingdom. But Lisana worked with Count Graham to restore the royal family of Anos. The Marquis had disobeyed since the fall of the kingdom. Cullen promised to restore the title and reclaim the territories the tyrant had taken, but they were not truly loyal. Lisana began to talk about Ljubljana being able to go and tell her about their relationship, but Ljubljana only saw aggression on one side. Ljubljana tried to convey that Luimund didn't agree with Lisana, but she didn't want to believe it, and in an instant Luimund was out of Lisana's hands. From afar he seemed frail, but up close he had a good enough strong body. He only came down from Lisana's unexpected blow. Lisana thought that Ljubljana wanted to brag about Luimund rushing towards her. Ljubljana wanted to calmly clarify the situation. Lisana was angry that Ljubljana was acting like she had the power here. She should have been near Luimund, not Ljubljana. Lisana decided to leave. Ljubljana asked her to tell Feltarg if something was wrong. She wanted to put all the trouble on Kadrik. Lisana left with the words that she would save Luimund. And now that she was gone, Ljubljana too decided to say goodbye. Luimund was puzzled that she would leave so easily. He really didn't want her to. He called out to her. Ljubljana was shocked and didn't understand. Then taking the girl's hand, Luimund says something unexpected. He asks Ljubljana to marry him. The girl was shocked. She thought he was crazy. He knew that after the second meeting, it was a foolish thing to ask, but he had to escape somehow. The Earl of Graham swore allegiance to the tyrant and offered him his daughter. The result was the tyrant's illegitimate son, Luimund. His mother was to be queen, but she was poisoned. And Luimund was constantly being threatened by the first prince. Luimund decided to become a debauchee, thus not drawing attention to himself. The prince and the first queen stopped the assassination attempts, but death came at the hands of the new empress. It seemed that such a short life was over. Luimund was executed, but he returned to the past. This was his chance not to die again at any cost. Even if he swore an oath of loyalty to the first prince, or pretended to be a woman, the reprisals of the lasting circle he could not avoid. This is how Luimund is currently living his 8th life. As a last resort, he decided to lock himself away in the House of Scholars, and was determined to study there for the rest of his days. But this plan, too, eventually failed. Cullen was surprised that Earl Graham had a grandson. Luimund was in an extremely awkward position being in front of the Empress. He had been dragged in as if he were a candidate for Kalina's hostages. But her eyes released the urge to finish him off. But his 8th life could not end here. He needed someone to protect and help him escape the clutches of Earl Graham and Marquis Odile. The mighty Ljubljana could help him with that. Luimund only asked to be with him for 3 years, and when that time was up, he would divorce him. He also mentioned the fulfillment of a blood oath, but Ljubljana reacted aggressively. She didn't understand how he knew about the blood oath. She hadn't told anyone. Ljubljana again angrily asked how he knew. Luimund began to worry about facing death again. He really didn't want to die. Suddenly he cried. Ljubljana didn't understand what it was about. Luimund was sad to die like that, but he had a chance to save himself. It was to be honest and tell the truth. Luimund thought that if he couldn't find an answer this way, he'd have to make up his own, even if he had to blame others. He said he heard it from his grandfather, who was planning treason. Ljubljana didn't understand why he proposed. Luimund needed all this to survive. He wanted to be loyal to the Empress and wishes to avoid a coup. What she really needed was a husband. Luimund thought that she had scared away all the candidates. Otherwise, it could not be explained that she was without a husband at that age. Luimund promised to reveal all the secrets of his grandfather's plot, to be faithful and sincere, and he promised never to fall in love with her. In his second life, he'd read that in books, and it had always worked. For Ljubljana, however, it wasn't believable at all. She had no idea what he was saying, and she thought he was informing her that he was going to cheat on her. Ljubljana had not meant it, and had promised to be faithful for the rest of their marriage. He did not want to have children out of wedlock like himself. Ljubljana looked him over. He was perfect in every way. Ljubljana was very embarrassed. He asked Her Majesty not to look at him like that. His voice trembled. Ljubljana thought it was a good sign that he was reacting to her gaze. Ljubljana said she accepted his proposal. She told Ljubljana to come to her manor on the third night. That way she would test his resolve. Ljubljana didn't understand why. But the point of the vows is that they must have 2 children in marriage. So Ljubljana had to see if Ljubljana could handle it. Because if Ljubljana really wanted to marry Ljubljana and survive, they were to meet in 3 days. After 3 days, Ljubljana waited for him, but he didn't come, and at first glance he seemed so determined. Apparently children were a very strange condition. Ljubljana thought about what she should do, forget and leave him, or go looking for him. A servant came and gave her important news. A black carriage had secretly left the Marquis of Odile, but then it returned to Earl Graham. Ljubljana realized she had to go immediately. Ljubljana didn't know where to find Ljubljana. Suddenly, as she was walking near Count Graham's house, she heard his voice. Ljubljana climbed onto the balcony and in the ocean observed an interesting picture. There was a big fight going on between Ljubljana and his grandfather. It turned out that Lisana was only pursuing Ljubljana on his grandfather's instructions. Ljubljana was very hurt that his grandfather was willing to sell him out because of his great lust for power. Lisana was only happy about it, but the boy had no reason to be with her. And then the grandfather began to threaten that if he did not submit, he would go to meet his mother. Ljubljana was unpleasantly surprised that his 8th life could be cut short at the hands of his grandfather. At that moment, Ljubljana bursts into the room, breaking the glass. Everyone is shocked by the appearance of the unknown woman. She has come to save her husband. Everyone hearing this is very shocked. Ljubljana's grandfather ordered the servants to take the boy away. He knew nothing about the marriage and considered it illegal. Count Graham thought Ljubljana could not handle the guards on her own. She only had a little knowledge of strategy, nothing more. Ljubljana represents something majestic just because her younger sister is the empress. The guards started to approach Ljubljana. She thought nothing would happen if she hit them easily. She wanted to approach them, and Ljubljana thought she wanted to leave him and grabbed her arm. Ljubljana started to justify that he only grabbed Ljubljana's hand because he was surprised, and quickly began to apologize for the insult. He was desperate. Ljubljana threw her cloak over Ljubljana and reiterated that she would not leave because she had come to save him. For the first time in 8 lifetimes, he felt real warmth. Ljubljana saw how hard it was for him. Servants began to arrive to take Ljubljana away, justifying that Ljubljana was in their care. But Ljubljana explained very well that anyone who wanted to touch her fiancé would be sacrificed to the cruel monsters. Ljubljana was about to leave with Ljubljana. When he started to lift him, it turned out that he had twisted his leg beforehand. But Ljubljana managed to become a foothold for him, and at that moment she realized how tall Ljubljana was. Count Graham did not allow Ljubljana to leave because he had to have permission. Ljubljana was of age and thought he had the right. Ljubljana interceded and said that the boy was now the property of the empress, and Ljubljana was taking him away. Count Graham thought this was nonsense and wanted to approach Ljubljana. But through the broken window, many arrows flew into the room. Ljubljana's men were waiting outside. Ljubljana approached and emphasized that Ljubljana was now her husband, so let him forget the nonsense. In the carriage, Ljubljana wondered if everything would be all right. After all, by law, nobles are entitled to property and inheritance. The empress could be punished for breaking the law. Ljubljana thought it would be easier for Ljubljana to just leave him. But Ljubljana assured him that she would handle it and everything would be all right. So there was no need to worry. Ljubljana began to have hiccups. Ljubljana offered to help, but Ljubljana didn't understand what she wanted to do. Ljubljana did something that frightened Ljubljana. As a consequence, the hiccups disappeared. One of Ljubljana's subordinates was eaten by a monster because of the hiccups, so she doesn't like the sound very much. Ljubljana looked at Ljubljana and thought about what she had done. They are not married yet, and she came to save him and called him husband. Luimond decided that he would do everything to make sure Ljubljana would not regret her decision. And today he would fulfill the terms of their marriage. The maid of honor was waiting for Ljubljana and Luimond on the doorstep. She ordered a hot bath to be prepared for him. The maid of honor was surprised to see a male guest in the house. While in the bath, Luimond thought about how he could have gotten here, and that his life would be normal here now, although Luimond is still worried. Originally, Luimond wanted to appear in front of Ljubljana as a person from the House of Scientists who knows about the future. Today was the day he would finally make his decision. Ljubljana thought about how Cullen would react to this whole situation. After all, this situation would soon become known, and how to explain everything. Because Luimond is not an ordinary man, but a flesh-and-blood tyrant. Luimond came. Ljubljana had no idea why. He came to fulfill his conditions, but Ljubljana thought they should rest first and the rest would follow. But Luimond insisted. Ljubljana saw him blush to the tips of his ears, and still he insisted. Apparently he had the courage of his convictions. Luimond asked to be called Louis now. If he didn't marry her now, he could forget about life. Louis also didn't want Ljubljana to regret her decision. Ljubljana thought about telling her sister tomorrow. And Luimond insisted on honoring his agreement. Ljubljana's reflexes kicked in because of the suddenness. She thought Luimond was weaker, but he feels strong enough and has dense musculature. Luimond asked to be released. Ljubljana agreed to do so if he went to his room, but he refused, so she refused to let him go. At that moment, she saw the same look as then at the banquet. She was anxious to know what it meant. Louis, addressing Ljubljana, your ladyship, asked her to let him go. Ljubljana noticed that Luimond was used to saying such words. He was shocked. Louis dared to make the first move, and they spent the night together. In the morning, he asked to sleep together a little longer. Ljubljana thought it was just a dream. For the first time, she woke up not alone, but with someone. Louis woke up and went to draw a bath, found the right oils. Everything was prepared to perfection. It was all for Ljubljana to relieve her fatigue. Water at the right temperature, dried petals, essential oils. Everything Louis did was perfect. How could he possibly know all this? Ljubljana was enjoying herself, and it was infuriating in a way. The maid of honor came in and told her to hurry up and eat, because there was a message from the imperial palace to come there sooner rather than later. Louis wanted to ask something already, but Ljubljana quickly covered his mouth with food. She thought that if she was summoned, Cullen knew everything. Luimond was worried about Ljubljana, but she assured him that she would be back as soon as possible, and everything would be fine. The atmosphere in the palace was frightening. Kalina noticed that Ljubljana had a lot of news for her and asked her to be honest. Kalina asked the servants to leave them alone. When it was just the two of them, she listened to Ljubljana. Kalina knew everything, but still asked about the incident that had happened. Ljubljana told her everything, and then Kalina did an amazing thing and gave her permission to marry Luimond. Ljubljana was surprised by such an easy and quick consent of Kalina. After all, the Empress wanted to use the tyrant's illegitimate son to bring out the traitors. But as it turned out, Cullen and the other dukes will not attend the wedding. Using Ljubljana and Luimond's wedding, Cullen will destroy everyone, and asked her sister not to take offense. After the wedding ceremony, there will be rumors that Ljubljana is enchanted by the tyrant's illegitimate son and quarreled with the Empress. And when the marriage expired, Luimond would be accused of treason and executed. Ljubljana was worried about Luimond. Cullen thought it was only because of her weakness for handsome men. She even scoffed a little at Ljubljana. After all, Ljubljana had chosen Luimond just by looking at his face. After chatting a bit with Kalina, Ljubljana was about to leave. But Kalina insisted that Ljubljana stay for breakfast. For quite some time now, Feldharg had been waiting for the reception. He had come before Ljubljana. When he was admitted, his appearance screamed something very important. Feldharg was angry that Cullen had given her blessing for Ljubljana and Luimond's wedding. He was against it. Kalina had talked about using those who were nothing for their own affairs. Feldharg was very hurt. For years he had been looking for his distant relatives to give up the title. By doing so, he would be able to get the Duchess of Ashlien. Feldharg wanted to know why Kalina had prevented him from obtaining Ljubljana. It was because Cullen had mistaken Feldharg for a traitor the day he surrendered. Also, the Cullens had developed unwanted feelings for Feldharg. If he marries Ljubljana, he will be faithful for the rest of his life. Kalina recalled the blow to her shoulder. Because of that, Ljubljana could no longer pick up a bow and went to the dangerous battlefield with a sword. That wound destroyed Ljubljana's body very badly. Cullen was angry that Feldharg wanted to marry Ljubljana after such a thing. But Feldharg claimed it was a fair duel. And didn't he pay for losing an eye? If Feldharg didn't fight back, he died. It was self-defense, which is why Cullen can't bless the union of Ljubljana and Feldharg. But Luimond only used Ljubljana to save his own life. Feldharg didn't understand how Luimond deserved an alliance with Ljubljana, and Feldharg himself wasn't worthy of it. Kalina pulled out a shawl. It was Ljubljana's shawl given to her for her 15th birthday, but Kalina often liked to pull it out and wear it. Both sisters liked it, and Kalina really wanted to take it. Eventually, Ljubljana gave the shawl to Kalina without ever wearing it. Kalina implied that Luimond was like a shawl, and Feldharg took the hint well. Kalina thought that Ljubljana had no use for Louis, so if Kalina ordered it, Ljubljana would kill Luimond. Kalina never gave Feldharg the chance to confess his feelings for Ljubljana. The Empress only amused herself by watching from afar, and Feldharg did not believe that this time when he wanted to confess, Kalina would sit idly by. Feldharg did not understand why Kalina had been very thorough before, and now she let it go. Cullen had her own reasons, which she did not want to reveal. When Ljubljana returned, Luimond was gone. No one knew where he was. The maid of honor said a colleague of Louis had come in, and then he disappeared. This colleague was Peony Lauren, who had recently been promoted to Baroness. Ljubljana asked if the entire estate had been checked, but only part of the West Wing had not been checked. As expected, Louis was there in the library. Ljubljana ordered the library to be stocked with scientific books, as that was what Luimond was studying. The maid of honor asked if the wedding had been approved. Of course the answer was yes, and maid of honor was very happy about it. Ljubljana asked everyone to leave because Louis was too sound asleep to be awakened. Ljubljana, his favorite wife, came home from work and Louis is still asleep. Ljubljana would do anything to make this carefree love last longer than 3 years. Ljubljana caught herself getting very angry at the thought of Luimond leaving the estate. Ljubljana looked at Louis sleeping and didn't understand what it was all about. After all, he was no different except for good looks. But Ljubljana was still worried about him. The only thing that worried Ljubljana was Peony's colleague. In the information conducted because of the check, there was no data about women. Now Ljubljana understood why Louis insisted on the marriage contract. After 3 years, he wants to leave Ljubljana and run away with Peony. But maybe it's not what Ljubljana thinks. After she left for the Empress's palace, Luimond sat for a long time thinking about what had happened. Ljubljana hadn't said a word. Luimond wondered if everything would be all right. While he was thinking, the maid of honor came in. She announced that Miss Peony Lauren was here. Luimond realized that she would be the one to help him find the answers to all his questions. Peony Lauren was the best student in the House of Scholars. Peony was a royal conservator, that is, she was head of the history department. Luimond was glad that Peony had come. He wondered how Peony knew that Louis was in this estate. There were many rumors that Ljubljana had been captivated by Louis's beauty and had stolen him from the hands of Count Graham. Luimond assured Peony that Ljubljana had learned of his situation and had simply relented. Louis reported that he wouldn't be at work for a week. Peony informed him that she had asked him for a vacation. After hearing all this, Peony was about to leave. But lastly, she passed on the professor's words, which said not to go too far for an answer. They were the right words for Louis at that moment. Luimond went to the library. He had read many different novels to survive in his life. Louis believed that was where the clue was. After one night with the main character, the princes would fall in love. Luimond wanted to find an exception where the protagonist fell in love with the prince. Otherwise, there was no chance for him to survive. Luimond began to think that he enjoyed his time with Ljubljana, but everything said that Luimond was abandoned after the first night. Come to think of it, maybe Louis was just in a hurry. But when Ljubljana brought Louis to the house, she said he was just a guest. Luimond wanted concrete answers. He seemed to be the only one with feelings. Louis wanted very badly to know who he was to Ljubljana. Upon waking up, Luimond was shocked to see Ljubljana around. Luimond was sound asleep, and she decided not to wake him up. She covered Louis with her cloak. He found the gesture very sweet. Ljubljana handed Luimond the marriage contract. He was surprised. Ljubljana informed him that she had received her blessing to marry in the imitator's court. The contract contained all the information about their marriage. After the divorce, Louis would be considered part of the duchy and would receive a pension and alimony. In return, he would be faithful for the entire 3 years of the marriage and would not expect paternal rights to the children. The contract is designed so that Louis can leave and not have to cover himself with lingering love for his in-laws. Louis signed the whole thing without a second thought. Louis realized that Ljubljana was responsible for what she said until the end. She was now his wife and he her husband. The two of them had taken on this burden, and the worry about something was simply fading away. Suddenly, Louis began to feel dizzy, and he fell to the floor. Ljubljana was very surprised and frightened by this, and at that moment, Ljubljana called him Louis for the first time. The doctor came in. After examining Louis, he said that Louis was very weak from overwork and fatigue. Louis had been through a lot when he lived with Earl Graham, and upon arriving at Ljubljana Manor, he was very worried and worked up. Louis began to rave and beg for help. He didn't want to die, but if Louis was given some rest and properly cared for, he would be fine. Ljubljana promised to protect Louis so he wouldn't die. Ljubljana waited for Louis to wake up and fell asleep beside him. He didn't understand why Ljubljana worked so hard for him. Doing so much, no one else had ever done so much for Louis in his entire life. Ljubljana knew that Louis was watching her. Ljubljana noticed that Louis was easy to catch because he was very loud. So she suggested that Louis learn to pretend to be asleep. Louis was very surprised when Ljubljana called him Louis. Ljubljana explained that since they were getting married soon, shortened names were better for comfort, and said that Louis could call her Luby. But Louis wanted to call Ljubljana Bia. To everyone she's Luby, but to him it's Bia. Even if Ljubljana ends up blowing his head off. To be honest, Ljubljana didn't like the nickname Ljubljana very much. Bia, on the other hand, sounded really nice. It had been 3 days since Louis had been sick. The doctor prescribed bed rest. Rumors spread faster and faster. There were even rumors that Ljubljana had fallen in love with the tyrant's illegitimate son and spent 3 days and nights in bed with him. In fact, Ljubljana was already awake for the 3rd day because of the tones of the job Cullen had given her. Ljubljana thought that, so she wouldn't do too much and decided to write a letter to Cullen, but as usual, she wouldn't read it. Count Graham thought that the relationship between Ljubljana and Cullen had broken down and came to speak out against the marriage. As it turned out, Kalena sent the Count a document authorizing the marriage. In the end, despite much talk, the so-called bloody meeting took place between Louis and Earl Graham at the Empress's palace. Count Graham emphasized his opposition to the marriage. Ljubljana was very tired of it, but said she would not give Louis away. She thanked him for his good upbringing. Ljubljana decided to give the Count a bounty. Ljubljana gave the Count a diamond mine in the west and a salt cave in the south. Count Graham was surprised, for it brings much profit to the empire. When the Empress gets rid of the traitors, all the property will be returned to the state, so everything was under control. Louis told Ljubljana it was too much to give away, but he didn't yet realize it was all part of the plan. Louis understood that the property would be used for the rebels, but that's exactly what Ljubljana needed. Ljubljana had been through so much hardship, and Cullen only gave her the crystal mines, all because those places would be used for the rebellion. Louis felt embarrassed and ashamed. He began to apologize. But Ljubljana said he shouldn't because everything has a hidden agenda. Ljubljana said that Louis was no longer Count Graham's subordinate, and that he should be happy about it. Now the Count's priority was money. In an instant, he was pleased and decided to leave Louis. Graham immediately began to talk of friendship and asked him to forget the incident. The Earl believed that if he succeeded, he would be considered the king's grandfather, and he wanted that very much. As expected, Graham was only the tail, not the body. They wished to regain the old kingdom and make Louis king, but Louis had nothing to do with that besides blood ties, and the greed of these people for a small reward immediately sold Louis out. If Louis was really considered for a king, they would not treat him so cruelly and would be loyal. But the only thing Louis got was only a hard life. The Count asked Ljubljana to give him a chance to speak privately with Louis. Ljubljana started to worry, but Louis assured her that everything would be fine. He also had something to say to Count Graham. To Louis, he is now just an earl. Luimund informs him that he doesn't belong to the Grahams anymore, and asks the Count to forget about him, not to come to Asvian, and not to visit Luimund. Ljubljana overheard a little and was sure her husband was doing as he should. Next, Ljubljana met Kadrik. He was angry. He realized from Ljubljana's face that everything went well. Feldharg found out about the reward Ljubljana had given and flared up. Ljubljana didn't understand what the problem was. But the problem was that Ljubljana was getting married. This problem was tearing Feldharg's heart apart. It would be nice if problems were solved simply. Feldharg began to say that Ljubljana did not notice the obvious from his side, no words or hints. And even now he had brought something rolled up from an unusual place. Ljubljana had no idea what Feldharg was talking about. Ljubljana thought it was referring to Cullen. The construction of the water platinum was underway. Kadrik wanted to take over the construction, but Kalina ignored and rejected such an offer. Kadrik is privy to all the affairs of the kingdom and has the most power out of the 3 duchies of the empire. It would be more advantageous for Kalina to marry him and gain more power. Feldharg thought that Ljubljana understood his intentions for her. But Ljubljana misunderstood and told him that he should talk to Kalina. At the worst possible moment for Feldharg, Luimond appeared, Kadrik's most hated enemy. Luimond is supposed to protect his wife. The conversation with Earl Graham ended quickly enough. Luimond was angered by Feldharg's intentions. Luimond emphasized that he knew this could happen, so he asked his wife to stay away from Feldharg. Feldharg was very surprised when Louis called Ljubljana Bia in an affectionate way. It pissed him off. Ljubljana decided that it had to stop because it could be irreparable. Luimond hugged Ljubljana. They both needed and enjoyed it. But Feldharg decided to retaliate by calling Luimond a pathetic puppy. Ljubljana would not tolerate that and told Feldharg to know his place. After all, Luimond is her future husband and Feldharg must show respect. The news of Feldharg's marriage really pissed Feldharg off. He didn't understand how Ljubljana could talk about such things in front of him. Luimond realized that it was better for them to leave now. Luimond picked up Ljubljana and immediately wanted to take her away from that nasty Feldharg. But Ljubljana's reflexes kicked in again, and she grabbed Louis by the throat. He couldn't breathe. Thankfully, Bia came to her senses in time and let go of Louis. It seemed a bit of an awkward gesture for Ljubljana to just walk away like that. Luimond was like a jealous dog to her. Luimond was carrying Ljubljana away. She shouted one last time to Feldharg that she was expecting him for the wedding, but of course he wouldn't come. Nevertheless, Ljubljana said the gift was obligatory. A few weeks later, Feldharg received a letter saying that the construction of the dam was being handed over to Feldharg. He would also pay for it, and in gratitude, the path would be named in his honor. Feldharg realized that it was all Ljubljana's doing. Ljubljana informed Luimond that preparations for the wedding had begun. The date will be set at the Imperial Palace. The preparations will be handled by the head maid, so Ljubljana has nothing to worry about. Ljubljana reminded Luimond of a professor from the House of Scholars. Then Ljubljana let Luimond sign the papers. He knew not to sign anything without reading it. They were papers to open an account for Luimond. The maid of honor took Louis to his room. He thought that with the money he could fulfill all his plans. Luimond wanted to get rid of Feldharg, but it was Ljubljana he had to worry about, not Feldharg. Louis wanted to buy back the diamond mine and dedicate all the rubies to Bia. The wedding was set for 3 weeks later. The maid of honor was shocked. That's very little time. Ljubljana was convinced that it would be easier to call a priest, but the maid of honor argued that the duchess's honor depended on it. Luimond was as shocked as maid of honor. Maid of honor was glad that someone cared. Luimond began to say that the main flowers should be lilies. He knows where to buy them. And Louis also asked that the Graham family emblems not be displayed. The maid of honor was mesmerized by this Louis. Ljubljana was very pleased that the relationship between Luimond and maid of honor was very good. In the end, Luimond was in charge of all the preparations. Louis had seen many weddings in his 8 lives, but this was his first with the man he loved. Ljubljana sent invitations to all the nobles. She even poisoned an invitation to Feldharg and Domingue. Ljubljana received news from the north. It was said that there had been an increase in attacks, and Ljubljana was asked to return. Ljubljana went to a local bar to check out the situation and meet a man. The people there were taking bets on who would wear the wedding dress for the Duchess's wedding. Everyone assumed it would be Ljubljana. When Ljubljana was asked to place a bet, the man she'd been waiting for showed up. Ljubljana was infuriated by such infuriating antics. Ljubljana dragged the guy outside and started asking questions about his clothes. Ljubljana talked about how covering his face wasn't enough. Ljubljana said they needed to step back and talk in a quieter place. But they clearly weren't going to be allowed to do that. These people from the bar saw Ljubljana and Lou Dante's obvious wealth. These alcoholics were offering to quietly give them all the jewelry. Lou Dante wanted to defend himself to the fullest, but Ljubljana wouldn't allow it. She didn't want blood. Ljubljana was getting married soon, and she didn't need all this trouble. Those men wanted to take the treasure themselves. Lou Dante managed without blood. Ljubljana did not want to witness this spectacle, so she admired the night sky. Duke-dominant Lou Dante is the youngest of the supporting dukes of the empire. He was the strongest duke in the empire. Lou Dante was handsome, but the shell is beautiful, but inside he only craved for blood. But Lou Dante didn't come here to see who would wear the wedding dress, Ljubljana or Ljubimond. He will not be at the wedding, but he has prepared a gift. That gift was valuable information that would help with the wedding. As Lou Dante approached, Ljubljana had that feeling again, as if there was a sword blade at her throat. As soon as Lou Dante or Feltarg approached, Ljubljana would get that feeling of trembling. Watching Ljubljana's nervousness, Lou Dante enjoyed it. A fine night was approaching, and if anything was wrong, he would nail it. Lou Dante reported that the rebels were determined to get married. Ljubljana wanted to know if Lou Dante was sure. They wanted to disrupt the wedding and take Ljubimond away. Lou Dante claimed there were more than 1 or 2 groups of rebels. He didn't understand why they would rebuild something that had long since been destroyed. The empire is a new country, and it's probably normal for people to cling to the old and want it back. Ljubljana thought that in this situation, it was not quite right to pretend that she and Kalena had a bad relationship because of a man. Or was it still worth putting herself in danger to expose the traitors? Ljubljana's face was completely serious. Lou Dante started to joke that he wished her husband was the illegitimate son of a tyrant. But then he realized that Ljubljana was only serious when she thought of Cullen. Lou Dante made it seem like he was the closest thing to a Cullen, but he couldn't be closer to his own sister. Lou Dante thought Ljubljana would be the last to marry, and he would be the first to marry. And not just marry her, but the Empress. He made no secret of it. Ljubljana wondered why Lou Dante and not Kadrik. Lou Dante was very amused by such words. Ljubljana wondered what other conditions Lou Dante would attach to the wedding gift. Lou Dante said that he could protect Ljubimond. Ljubljana was amused to hear that, since she could protect him herself. But Lou Dante insisted. After all, Ljubljana is not always with Ljubimond. It was a nice continuation. Lou Dante was the head of the intelligence service, and he has his own guard. But it was important for Ljubljana to have a place by Her Majesty's side, and she refused Lou Dante's offer. Ljubljana thought that if there was someone suspicious, she could deal with them without the Cullens knowing. Lou Dante took offense, saying he had told her everything for nothing. Ljubljana asked if Cullen knew, but Lou Dante wouldn't say. After Ljubljana arrived in the capital, there was an occasion when Ljubljana met Lou Dante at a ball. He asked why Ljubljana had been fussing so much lately. Ljubljana was looking for her husband at the time and said if a normal person got into Lou Dante's information network, to let her know. But Lou Dante didn't want to do that for nothing. That's if Ljubljana could help with the marriage from Cullen. Ljubljana realized it wouldn't work with him. Lou Dante said that if Ljubljana couldn't find a husband, she could turn to him. Ljubljana didn't take the hint, but Lou Dante would be her husband if she became empress. Lou Dante believed with great faith that he should have the best. After all, he was the best, and his wife should match it. He asked Ljubljana to praise him as much as possible during his audience with Kalena, and to say many nasty things about Feltarg. Ljubljana realized even then that Lou Dante wasn't the right man for the job. When Ljubljana returned in the morning, the maid of honor noticed her, but Ljubljana said she woke up early and went for a walk. To change the subject, Ljubljana was reminded of today's wedding dress fitting. It wouldn't be done without her. She absolutely had to attend. Ljubljana questioned if she was putting on the dress. The servants who were standing nearby at once began to murmur about who had placed what bets. The maid of honor was very angry at such actions of the servants. The maid of honor wondered if the rumors on the street were the reason Ljubljana had such thoughts. Their conversation was interrupted by Louimond, who had woken up. He asked his Bia how she had slept. Louimond looked very sleepy. Perhaps it was because Ljubljana was awake next to him. She had to meet Lou Dante, that's why they slept apart that night. But instead of sleeping, Ljubljana was learning important information from Lou Dante. At the table, Louimond asked about Ljubljana's business, for he noticed that she looked tense and in thought. Louimond emphasized that if Ljubljana was back late, she should still get some sleep. He said that he was a sound sleeper, and if someone came and lay down next to him, he would not notice. This information Louimond told Ljubljana just in case. The maid of honor came and took Ljubljana to the dress fitting. Ljubljana ordered maid of honor to go help Louimond. Maid of honor thought that Ljubljana didn't need her help anymore. But Ljubljana didn't want anyone to see the dresses before the wedding. Ljubljana thought there was no one in the room. But then she did see some people. As it turned out, they were designers. Ljubljana suggested that they start trying on dresses, and everyone noticed that Ljubljana is not scary as many people say, and spread rumors about her. It was raining outside. Ljubljana remarked that it was good weather. The designer was surprised by it. Ljubljana didn't think that tailors could like the rain because clothes get wet in it. Ljubljana was given an album of different designs. There were classic, elegant, fun, and bold designs. But to Ljubljana, they were all like the same. But all of these designs were beautiful. Ljubljana didn't want the designer to misunderstand her. Among all of them, Ljubljana wanted a beautiful, unusual dress that would not look strange and would fit her. Ljubljana asked the designer which dress would have a skirt that could be flared more, and she was shown that beautiful and lovely dress. But Ljubljana wanted to inflate the skirt even more and put out her wishes about it. The designer provided an option on how to do it. Ljubljana liked it. Next, Ljubljana asked for some other things to be done to the dress, and she emphasized that everything be kept secret from the maid of honor as well. The maid of honor came to Louimond to help, but he didn't need any help at all. Louimond had lived 8 lives and knew exactly what to wear and how to wear it. He was fully recognized for it. Louimond wondered what was wrong with Bia, why maid of honor wasn't helping her. But maid of honor explained that mistress said she could handle it on her own. It was obvious that Maiden was very worried about Ljubljana. A doctor came to see Louimond. After examining Louis, the doctor said that he was completely healthy. Lastly, the doctor gave him some medicine for his male health. After the doctor found out that Louimond would be Ljubljana's husband, it would not be good if he collapsed from impotence. But Louimond didn't need it at all and gave it to the servants. They were very happy about it. Louimond began to think of children. He wanted the firstborn to be a girl, as beautiful as Ljubljana's mother, with red hair and beautiful eyes. Louimond didn't want to be separated from his children. Louimond would be by his daughter's side all the time and would never let her out of his arms. Aristocrats usually have their children raised by nannies, but Louimond wanted to take care of the children himself. Louimond would finally have a normal family, not one that bullied and disrespected like before. Now Louis was following the book. After all, it had all the answers. Louimond thought that if he showed good behavior, Ljubljana would love him and break the marriage contract. Louimond couldn't wait for Ljubljana. He missed her very much. Louis wished that this night they would spend the night together and not have Ljubljana stay in the study again. Louimond was very cold without her. He felt empty without her. Every woman who marries must take care of the other girls. That's why Ljubljana came to the imperial palace. After all, that's where Peony Lauren works, and Ljubljana wanted to talk to her. But she had to wait for a while Ljubljana waited for Peony. She spoke to the man who had brought her, also one of the employees. He was positive about the destruction of the scientist's house. There was a lot of work to be done and a lot of smart staff. The man then asked how Ljubljana's husband was doing. He hadn't heard any rumors that he was dead, so he assumed he was fine. After all, it would be very unhealthy for the chief accountant to die. The man had to leave and said he would bring Peony as soon as he could. Ljubljana waited, and quite some time passed. Ljubljana was already thinking of canceling the meeting, but at the last moment, Peony Lauren showed up. The girl called herself Peony Lauren, and said that she was the secretary of the Bureau of Internal Affairs. Ljubljana liked that very much, and she thought Peony had a good enough character. Ljubljana still thought that Luiman loved Peony. Peony, on the other hand, was looking at Ljubljana with a very satisfied look. Ljubljana didn't understand that look. She thought it was probably due to excitement. Ljubljana asked her to tell what Peony was doing now. Peony was preparing for a project to repair the road from the capital to the west. Also, Peony was worried about the maintenance of the waterways. Ljubljana was surprised. Peony was smart, had ambition. Ljubljana would do well to take such personnel back to the north. But there was a suspicion that Peony would see it as exile. Peony loved to talk about the waterways. As it turned out, this was not only to increase production, but also to elevate the Empress. It was now clear why Cullen was pushing this project so much. Peony wondered why Ljubljana had come to her. Ljubljana, after all, just wanted to look at her husband's potential mistress. But Peony thought that Ljubljana wanted to use her for some greater purpose. Peony was overjoyed. Though Ljubljana didn't understand what she was saying yet, Peony knew that if she worked hard, she would be noticed. But the other workers wanted to demote and leave the East because they hated it. Peony was a history major and was very happy that this was her new chapter, and she could easily observe and even participate in it. Ljubljana knew that only books were read in the scholar's house, and wouldn't it be hard for Peony? But physical strength was also important to her, and in the scholar's house they practiced. Now Ljubljana understood where Luimond got his body from. Ljubljana looked at Peony and saw no sadness in her that Luimond was getting married, but Ljubljana promised herself that she would give them a chance to be together in 3 years. And if this girl worked like this, she would be promoted quickly, and she and Luimond would have to run away quickly so that Louis wouldn't be killed. Ljubljana wondered if Peony could trade ambition for love. Ljubljana couldn't do it. She couldn't sacrifice anything because she couldn't get Luimond. Ljubljana lost. Ljubljana returned home and asked about Louis. She was informed that Luimond had not left his room since the doctor's visit. Ljubljana decided not to visit him and let him rest. Apparently, he was tired from preparing for the wedding. But a brave servant told Ljubljana that she should probably check on her husband-to-be. Ljubljana was surprised and didn't know if she should go to Luimond's room. Ljubljana was angry that they knew what she should do better than she did. Ljubljana felt that she would only get in his way. The servant went on and said that Ljubljana would never interfere. That night when Ljubljana didn't come, Luimond waited for her until morning, and the servant carried him candles until dawn. Now Ljubljana understood why Luimond was so sleepy. The girl began to cry and felt sorry for her master. The other maid was afraid that Ljubljana would get angry and went to call the oldest maid. But Ljubljana was not going to get angry at all. Ljubljana wasn't hurt by the tears, but she wasn't angry. She wanted an answer to the question, and then the maid could calmly continue crying further. After all, the maid of honor would be arriving soon, and she had to make sure she didn't get in her face. Ljubljana wondered what had happened to make the maid cry. Turns out the maid felt sorry for Luimond. He does a lot for the Duchess and the house in general, and the maids wanted Ljubljana to be warmer to him. Luimond asks every day how much alcohol Ljubljana has drunk, makes menus so the Duchess doesn't get an upset stomach, checks her papers, and even found a mistake. Also, Luimond was going to insulate the sleeping quarters because the winter would be cold. Even the shirt Ljubljana was wearing now was picked out and ironed by Luimond. Louis took over all the running of the house. Before that, the head maid had been in charge, because Ljubljana wasn't interested in running the house at all. But now Luimond had become an authority to the servants and could be entrusted with the running of the house. There was no place Luimond couldn't get to, and the atmosphere in the house had changed considerably. Life with Luimond was changing before one's eyes. It seemed he and Ljubljana were really getting married. The two maids emphasized that Mr. Luimond shouldn't be offended. He didn't deserve it, especially if he could still run away. Ljubljana agreed and went to see Luimond. The maids were very happy about this action. They thanked Ljubljana profusely. When Ljubljana opened the door to the room, she saw Luimond sleeping at the table. She was shocked. Household chores would most likely tire him out a lot. Ljubljana watched Luimond and realized that after a while, she would be very reluctant to let Luimond go. A few days later, the wedding day came. Ljubljana was helped to dress. The maid of honor noticed Ljubljana's secret and was shocked, but Ljubljana emphasized that it was a secret. She was beautiful. Everyone was in awe of Ljubljana and this dress she had chosen. Ljubljana wanted to rest before the ceremony, but she was forbidden because if she lay down, she would ruin her hair, and if she sat down, she would ruin her dress. Ljubljana was angry and hoped that Luimond would be tortured in the same way. After all, if they were a married couple, they should suffer together. All the guests were surprised to see such a thing. It was the first time they had seen such a place, and the smell of lilies captivated their hearts. And then, the most important thing began. The bride and groom began to appear. The bride came out first, followed by the groom. The Duchess put a dress on. Those who bet wrong lost a lot of money, and the girls were captivated by Ljubljana's beauty. Ljubljana looked at Luimond. He was beautiful as expected, his irresistible beauty and that look. Suddenly he began to cry. Ljubljana didn't understand why. What could have happened? She quickly began to ask him what was wrong. But Luimond was crying because of his wife's beauty. In that snow-white dress, she reminded him of an angel who had just descended from heaven. Ljubljana thought he was crying because he didn't want to get married. She thought she'd given him enough chances to leave. But now that they were here, Ljubljana would not let Luimond go. He's her man for 3 years, and then she'll give him to Peony. People around here were horrified that Ljubljana was wearing a dress. They thought Ljubljana would kill everyone out of anger. But Ljubljana was not preoccupied with that. She wiped Luimond's tears and said that he should not cry because it was a beautiful day. Luimond was pleased to hear that it was a beautiful day for Ljubljana. He looked at her. She was incredibly beautiful. Luimond was glad that there was no Feldharg and he couldn't see it. Ljubljana thought that Luimond was crying because he didn't want to get married, but he couldn't avoid it. People started saying that the groom was stolen and he has to get married. Ljubljana fell so in love with him that she even got into Earl Graham's house. It's all false, but people couldn't explain Luimond's tears any other way. The ceremony began. The priest was shocked and afraid, but he had to marry these people. Luimond thought they wouldn't marry because he was a bastard son. But in order to do it, Ljubljana sent 2 wagons of gold to the convent. The couple had to hold hands. Luimond's were warm and soft. Ljubljana's were wounded and blistered. Luimond promised himself he would do anything to keep her from getting hurt again. A red thread wrapped around their hands, a symbol of God's blood spilled. This ribbon was needed for the vows of becoming a married couple. Everyone around them was overjoyed. They really liked the couple and were happy for Ljubljana and Luimond. The consummation of the marriage went on. Now Ljubljana and Luimond had to say their vows of fidelity to each other. When the priest said to begin the vows to Ljubljana, bandits burst into the ceremony grounds. Their purpose was to rescue Prince Luimond. No one realized what was happening. People were shocked, and the musicians suddenly became archers. It was an uprising. The guests tried to escape, all fleeing wherever they could. Count Graham didn't realize who it was that did it without his command. But behind the trees stood Lysana and prayed that all would go well and succeed. This had been the plan all along, and Lysana wanted to see it through. Ljubljana pushed Luimond behind her so that he would be more or less safe. For the priest, Ljubljana threw down an altar to hide him there. This altar Luimond had prepared on his own, and he felt a little sorry for his work. Suddenly, Luimond started to be approached, but he didn't want to. He thought Ljubljana would think Louis had something to do with it, but she knew it wasn't his fault. Ljubljana wanted the brigands to reveal their identity, but they called Ljubljana a traitor and refused to give their names. It was here that Ljubljana's secret was revealed. Anyone who called her a traitor didn't live long. Pulling Luimond back, Ljubljana began a full defense. Due to her desire for the fit of her dress, Ljubljana could defend herself well. Her dress was very versatile, and it would take off into the sky. This helped Ljubljana distract the brigands and attack with full force and surprise. While Ljubljana fought off the miscreants, one of them took Luimond away, but Ljubljana quickly dealt with the scoundrel. She cradled Luimond against her and told him to close his eyes. By his bia, he could fear nothing. The rebels wanted to start firing bows, but Ljubljana warned that such actions would hurt Luimond. The rebel leader shut Ljubljana up and was about to give the command to his archers, but Ljubljana did it first. All were annihilated, only the bravest was left. He wouldn't give his name or the name of the customer, but begged for mercy. But Ljubljana wouldn't do it and killed the enemy, Lisana, who was hiding very afraid of being found. Luimond was still standing with his eyes closed, and Ljubljana was afraid to approach him in such a bloody state. Ljubljana thought that Luimond would be frightened of her seeing such a sight. It was clearly not for those who came from the House of Scientists. Suddenly, as Ljubljana was heading towards Luimond, she saw a gunman behind him, and she sped off to save her Louis as quickly as possible. In the last minutes, Ljubljana managed to throw Luimond off. He was about to be killed with an iron arrow and a tight bow. Ljubljana ordered her archers to act. But in this way they could not get rid of the enemy. And so, near Ljubljana lay a bow. She took it and finished what she had started. Luimond was frightened and surprised. Ljubljana thought that she had shown her cruel side again. It was bad. But that was the way things were. It couldn't be avoided. Luimond ran up to Ljubljana in a flash. She thought he would have a terrible opinion of her after the sight of her. But Luimond was very worried about Ljubljana, and it was important for him to know if she was okay or if she was hurt. Luimond wanted Ljubljana to get on his back, and he took her to the doctor immediately so he could examine her. Ljubljana had forgotten the last time anyone had been so concerned about her. Ljubljana explained that she wasn't injured, but the blood of the dead. Ljubljana whipped around to Luimond and was grateful that he wasn't frightened to see her like this. Luimond said that he understood that Ljubljana was doing everything to protect him. Louis was thankful that Ljubljana had not hesitated to protect him and that she had remained unharmed. After these actions, Ljubljana became more and more reluctant to let Luimond go. Ljubljana asked Luimond to continue the ceremony, but he didn't understand how to do it in such a mess. Ljubljana said that everything had to be finished now, because they would have to send the request for a new wedding date again. We'd have to make new preparations, and she couldn't waste 3 years of their marriage on such nonsense. Luimond was willing to continue. It wasn't the rebels who tried to kill Louis, but someone else entirely, and who it was is unknown. Ljubljana wanted to find out who made the attempt on Luimond's life. People were shocked to learn that Ljubljana was continuing the ceremony. They said that Ljubljana was really a monster duchess. The ceremony continued. All the newlyweds had to do was sign the marriage contract. When Ljubljana signed the paper, a drop of blood dripped onto the paper. But the priest said it wouldn't be a problem, and he would fix it. After signing the papers, the priest announced that the holy marriage was now fixed. The deed was done. When Luimond wanted to take Ljubljana's hand, she did not let him do so, explaining that she was covered in blood. But that didn't stop Luimond, and he took Ljubljana in his arms. He thought she was shying away from him, but she wasn't. Ljubljana just didn't want to get him dirty. Luimond didn't care at all about the blood, or that Ljubljana would stain him. He asked Ljubljana to look at him. Luimond swore that he would be the most faithful husband to her. Ljubljana said she would also be faithful to him. They took a vow of fidelity to each other. The people around them were happy to see such a picture of the fusion of two beautiful people. But Lisana, who was also there, harbored hatred towards the couple. She didn't understand how a monster duchess and her fearless husband could be a perfect couple. Lisana cried and didn't understand how Luimond could do this to her. With tears in her eyes and hatred, Lisana ran away from the ceremony. Lisana arrived home. She realized that Luimond loved his wife Ljubljana. Lisana was desperate why Louis loves Ljubljana, who terrifies everyone and not her. Lisana longed to snuggle up to the maid and tell her everything, to open her heart, but such a thing was not accepted, and to do such a thing was displeasing. The girl came into her father's study. He reported that Colonel Gale had begun to act. Lisana's father thought it a good choice. After all, the Marquisate had been stripped of their power early on, and with the possibility of defeat, they would not suffer. Because Colonel Gale was radical, it was thought he would stay, unless, of course, Lisana left a trail of unpleasant consequences. Lisana concealed her identity and traveled to the capital to deliver a message through an unsuspecting maid. The most important thing was that it was done and the consequences were not important. Lisanna stood shivering. Her father thought it was already cold, but Lisanna was shivering because of excitement. Lisanna's father shouted in a voice, "Lisanna van Odile," and the girl immediately stopped shivering. Her father emphasized that she should be steadfast and brave, and most importantly arrogant. Her father wanted Lisanna to be Queen of Aden. He began to tell her about Queen Olin, who had protected her son from a tyrant with fortitude and bravery. Father told Lisanna that in order for her to be queen, she had to take good care of Louismond. But Lisanna told him that he loved his wife dearly. Lisanna's father didn't believe it at first, but emphasized that she was a future queen and should not go beyond what was allowed. So he sent his daughter off to rest. Lisanna's father thought that she should definitely become queen. He realized that if he had known sooner, he would not have missed the moment and started training her from a young age. A servant came to tell him that Earl Graham had brought a salt mountain. Lisanna's father knew of the deal, and no one else suspected it. Count Graham mistakenly thought he was the center of the rebellion and did everything he could to keep Lisanna's father from turning on him. He ordered the salt mountain to be returned to Count Graham, but this mountain was a good source of income, and troops could be hidden there. But Marquis Odile understood this perfectly well and didn't want to act on someone else's plan. Marquise Odile was amazed by Ljubljana. After all, she had only been idle before, but now she had changed a lot. And the prince descendant of the Ainos family was also surprising. Louismond, in order to save himself, went to the scholar's house. When the scholar's house was destroyed, Louismond suddenly wanted to get married. This also surprised the Marquis, but marriage was also for salvation, but Louismond was going to the most dangerous place for salvation. Observing this, the soul of the Marquis Odile could not help but grow stronger. The Marquis surely wanted to make Louismond a king. Ljubljana needed to figure out who was involved in the rebel attack, and who knew better besides Count Graham. The Earl knew nothing and could not tell Ljubljana was very angry about the ruined wedding. She had promised the Earl a tour of the north if he ever came near Louismond again. Ljubljana understood and knew that this time Earl Graham was innocent, but she thought he could use a little punishment for his bad attitude towards Louismond earlier. The wedding feast continued. Louismond's friends from work came to see him. Because of the amount of work they had to do, they were a little late, but they brought a present. They wished the couple happiness. Peony couldn't come because she was busy with a waterway project. Lately, Peony has been working so hard that she doesn't even go home. Louismond thought that she could at least come and have lunch with them. Louismond said goodbye to his friends. Only the aristocracy didn't leave. Louismond didn't like the look in their eyes. They looked like they wanted something. The aristocracy wanted the 5 colored stones that were on the altar. These stones were very important, because if the guests who received these stones would have a hard time, the family who gave the stones would have to give their help. The people wanted to ask for the stones themselves, but Ljubljana prepared other gifts and gave them. The aristocracy was in a bad mood because they didn't get what they wanted. They called Ljubljana a real monster because she doesn't know aristocratic manners. Ljubljana left the altar in the house. She wasn't going to give it to anyone. It was made by Louismond. Also, when Ljubljana needed help, no one ever helped. When Ljubljana and the Cullens' parents were killed, Ljubljana sent letters to everyone who gave stones. There were over 20 of them, but no one ever responded to help. Everything was on schedule: wedding, buffet, and first wedding night. Louismond wasn't sure if the wedding night was mandatory, but the servant assured him it was more than mandatory. Even though Ljubljana and Louismond had been reunited long before the wedding, Louismond was still nervous. But rather, he realized that there was no point in being nervous because his wife had not yet arrived. Ljubljana still had a lot of work to do. She wanted to find out who had ruined the wedding. It was Colonel Gale, assigned to guard the outskirts of the capital. Before the battle at dawn, when the tyrant was powerless, the colonel had capitulated. Ljubljana didn't understand if the colonel had done it himself, but that was the only thing Duke Dominant knew, and the investigation was ongoing. Ljubljana asked that it be investigated as quickly as possible. The maid of honor came in. Ljubljana was worried if she was all right. Luckily, maid of honor was not hurt, and came to see if Ljubljana would leave her husband unattended. Ljubljana was just about to go to him. When Ljubljana came into the room, she found an interesting scene. Louis had fallen asleep, waiting for Ljubljana. Ljubljana wanted to be angry because the first wedding night is so important, and Louis was asleep. But Luimon's handsome, sleeping face was very attractive and sweet. Ljubljana realized he was very tired from the day, so she decided that a wedding night like this would be good for him. It is much faster to fall asleep with the breathing of a sleeping person. Ljubljana missed such comfort. It's been a long time. On the battlefield and in the north, Ljubljana had feared it, but one cannot get used to it either. A man came to Feldharg to inform him that they had failed to kill Luimond. Feldharg was disappointed, but worried that no one would find out. It turned out that the rebels invaded at the same time, so no one noticed or thought of Feldharg. Kadrik asked if Ljubljana was all right and let the man go. Many rumors were already spreading around the capital. Everyone was shocked that Ljubljana's wedding had been invaded by bandits. Some said she would get angry and bring beasts from the north and destroy the capital. Some said she feared the empress because she hated her for her alliance with the tyrant's illegitimate son. While these rumors were spreading, Ljubljana slept. Luimond wondered how his Bia had slept and kissed her. Ljubljana was very embarrassed and said they had business to attend to, so it was time to get up. It couldn't go on like this. Ljubljana and Luimond hadn't been out of bed for 2 weeks. Ljubljana asked if Maid of Honor was feeding Luimond in secret. After all, he always had plenty of energy. The Maid of Honor thought it was because he loved Ljubljana so much. Ljubljana didn't think so. She thought that Luimond loved Peony. The Maid of Honor was very curious if Ljubljana felt the same way. Ljubljana could not say that she felt nothing at all for Luimond. The Maid of Honor was very happy that Ljubljana loved Luimond as much as he loved her. Ljubljana received a letter from the north. It said that the beast population was growing very fast, and that winter would be much earlier this year. And Ljubljana was asked to return soon. Luimond came to see Ljubljana. He wanted Ljubljana to finish her business soon. But Ljubljana had a couple of other things to do, but in front of Luimond's pitying look, she left them for later. This really lifted Luimond's spirits. Luimond was worried whether they were really not important matters, but Ljubljana assured him that if they were newlyweds, they could have a little fun. Ljubljana felt very good. She was happy to spend time with Luimond. But Ljubljana and Luimond were interrupted. Cullen loaded her down with work. Ljubljana was very angry. Kalina ordered the servants to be until the last job was done. Ljubljana was angry and didn't understand why Kalina was giving her so many things to do if she had just gotten married. It was getting dark by the time Ljubljana finished everything. Ljubljana wanted to relax and have a drink, but Luimond started feeding her. Next, he pumped to massage Ljubljana's legs. Such actions on Luimond's part were very pleasing to Ljubljana. Ljubljana looked at Luimond and realized that he was not a rabbit as she used to think, but a real beast. Then it was close to spending the night together.